Are you thinking of leaving corporate, but too afraid to make the move? Have you already escaped corporate, but are finding it hard to run your dream business? Are you wasting valuable time by attempting to figure challenges out on your own? We have created a podcast for corporate escapees running their own business. This is the Corporate Escapees Podcast by Build, Live, Give. We bring you firsthand experiences of guests going through many of the struggles you face each and every day as a corporate escapee. We get real with no corporate BS. And now, over to your host, Paul Higgins.
Welcome to Corporate Escapee Stories, brought to you by Build, Live, Give. Today, I'm very excited to have Jon Yeo from Bright Star Consulting. Jon left corporate quite some time ago, but he gives some really rich insights into some of the toughest periods he faced in running his own business and how they might apply to you. He also gives some brilliant examples of how to take complex messages and simplify them to build an engaged audience. And he also gives some great advice on how to remain focused when it's so easy to be distracted these days. So Jon is really brilliant in the way that he helps people present on stage, and you'll get a lot of those learnings through this podcast today. So what I'll do now is hand you over to Jon Yeo from Bright Star Consulting. Welcome, Jon Yeo from Bright Star Consulting to Corporate Escapees, brought to you by Build, Live, Give. We're going to really get to know a lot about you today, Jon, but why don't we start with something that your family or friends would know about you that our listeners wouldn't?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of old vintage cars. So I've just finished restoring a 1934 Singer Le Mans, which is, to describe it to some people because they don't know what it looks like, it looks like an old MG with spoke wheels, but it actually is a precursor to MG.
Brilliant. And how involved, Jon, do you get in the restoration?
Not as involved as I probably should, but a distinct lack of talent severely limits my ability.
Excellent. And so is it on the road now?
Yes, for the most part it is. Some days are better than others. It is an old car.
Brilliant. And I know you're based in Melbourne in Australia. Where do you love to drive?
Oh, anywhere where there's a twisty, windy road. It's a really high performance car for 1934 standards, and so it really loves those twisty, windy roads. And so anywhere where I can kind of get an open road and a bit of free movement.
Yeah, it's interesting around, autonomous cars and what's going to happen. And they're saying, depends who you ask, but let's say it's 5 years. I just wonder what's going to happen to that driving experience, because I love to drive cars. I don't love to drive them all the time, but I love to drive them in certain times. I just wonder what's going to happen. Have you got any thoughts on what's going to happen with your ability to drive in the future?
Yeah, look, I do love that old sense of freedom you get from an open-top car through a windy road, especially in the country. At the same time, I can't wait for a self-driving car. In fact, as soon as they are affordable, I'm going to get one. They have so many advantages over a regular car. But I think that's going to be a crossover that we're going to see for at least another 10, 20 years beyond that, that self-driving car phenomenon. It's just a question of being aware of your environment like any other technology. There are robots that are aware of environments in factories with people and other robots moving around. I don't think it will be more complex in the real world out there, but I don't think it's impossible. I think they can sit well together.
Yeah, great. Excellent. And I know you have been a while since you've been in the corporate environment. And as you know, this is about corporate escapees, but why don't you just tell us a little bit about your corporate escapee story?
Yeah, so my last real job, if you want to call that, was in 2004. I was a technical account manager at Microsoft. But my career began in the 90s, where I was a IT expert, in particular Y2K, for anyone who's old enough to remember what that is, Millennium Bug. But back then there wasn't a CIO or a CTO. So the only way an engineer could get a complex message across to a senior executive in the C-suite usually was a corridor conversation. And so I got really, really good at making sure that people could articulate these very complex messages in short periods of time to busy and distracted people. And so that became, I guess, my I don't know if you call it a superpower, but it's certainly a skill that stood me really good, well, moving forward, whether it was in leadership roles, whether it's communicating to new people, whether it's taking that opportunistic corridor conversation and really making something of it. And I guess that led to my current job, which is now curator for TedX Melbourne, but also a speaker coach and helping people articulate those messages in short periods of time.
Great, and we'll certainly find out more about that in the build section. But just sort of take us back as to, why did you leave Microsoft, brilliant company? At that point, I'm assuming it would have been at the absolute top of its industry. What led you to make the change?
Yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt, it was at its peak. I've never been in an organization that's that positive and that forward thinking. They lost their way sort of after that a bit, unfortunately. But I had a combination of things going on. I was really never satisfied with corporate life in general. I'm not the type of person that takes people's leads just because. I like inspired leadership. I like engaged communities. I love working with great people. And Microsoft had great people, but I felt at the time wasn't really going where I resonated with me. On top of that, I had been investing quite heavily and managed to build a little bit of a nest egg. And so I guess the first piece of advice I'd give to anyone who's thinking about this is build up a strong network, nest egg, maybe 2-3 years before you decide to make that move. I thought it would last 2-3 years. It didn't last anywhere near that because of my ambitions. And I did get myself caught out a little bit.
Yeah. So what do you mean by that? What you mean? You ran out of money, or?
Yeah, I ran out of money. I probably ran out of a bit of talent. I made a lot of assumptions about what I think business is and what business could do. I was excellent at being a technical deliverer of a certain skill set, but wasn't really au fait with the marketing, branding, and sales cycles of different types of organizations. Probably wasn't that good at negotiation in those early days. And spent probably the vast majority of time, I reckon almost all of it, on basically unproductive tasks that I thought were productive.
Yeah, and look, a lot of our listeners, and including myself, when I first left corporate, I know I certainly fell in a similar trap. What are a couple of key things that you've learned, by doing it the hard way, that you could pass on to people that are in that position right now?
Be as frugal as you can and multiply what you think that should be by 10. I think get super clear about what you're not going to do. And I find that clarity is the number one challenge for everyone, whether they're a senior executive, whether they're just starting out. Poor clarity actually is what makes for poor messaging. And poor messaging is what creates confusion. And confusion is why there's so many inefficiencies in my world. Not only in what people do, but what they're not going to do.
And I know that, that's a real art for you, that you help people do that, whether it's on stage or other ways. What are some when someone comes to you and you I suppose it's like a guitar that when someone's hit the wrong note, how do you get them to strike that right note? What are some things that you do and some techniques?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's very much a psychology and an attitude as to what you do, because one of the first things I learned was how inefficient I was. And I was like a machine learning about how to be more efficient and more effective, to the point where I actually became a productivity consultant just by default. People were just asking me, how are you managing to get so much done in short periods of time? And then it actually ended up being the speaking stuff. Because it's one thing for you to be personally effective, but you can only scale that to a certain point. And so I learned that I needed to be effective as a communicator in order to get the people around me to be effective as well. So I then refined that down around effective personal communication. And then that extended to the work I do today, which is around brand communication. So I guess it was an iterative process, and you've got to be 100% committed to improvement of self and self-awareness. Once you master that, I think everything else kind of falls in place. I know that's a massive overgeneralization, but that's what I really feel. If you master yourself, everything else seems to work its way towards that refinement.
Great. And as far as, were there times when you hit the lows, I suppose, of money and also, in some degrees expertise? Were there ever times that you thought about going back to corporate?
I have probably been through some of my, hate to be bearer of bad news, probably some of my darkest times as a solo operator, because the buck stopped with me and the limitations were me. And I had to really face my own realities about how good I thought I was about certain things, or how well or not the situation really was. There was a point where I was calculating how much travel I needed to do for that day, going to my coin jar and calculating how much fuel I needed to put in the car in order to get there and get back, and not get stuck halfway in order to make ends meet. It was pretty serious. So I was absolutely clear and absolutely adamant that I needed to make a change in the world. And I was absolutely clear about that I knew I couldn't do it through a corporate arm. There'd be too many encumbrances. It would be too slow, too inefficient. I felt too ineffective and would require way too many compromises. And so I was adamant that if I was going to make a mark in my world, that I really needed to commit to this myself. And if it was my fault for not achieving, then it would be my fault, and I would be okay with that. But in order to achieve the things that I want to achieve, I think the only way to do it is to do it in a way that I feel is most appropriate. And I think I continually focused on that, and I still do to that.
And what about help? What sort of help did you get as you went through that process of raw self-discovery?
I think the biggest mistake is I didn't get help in the start. I actually thought I could do this, and I thought I had that clarity. And it wasn't until I had that external point of view going, do you really know what you're going to do? Are you really clear about how this is going to turn out? Then I realized how unprepared I was. And so I got myself little projects. I got a mentor for sales for a little while and worked with them for a little while. Then I got one on business process, worked on them for a while. Then one on myself, worked on myself for a lot. In fact, that one probably was about 2 years worth of work. So I was kind of piecemeal in terms of knowing what I wanted to achieve, knowing what my biggest weakness was, and then just being relentless about working on it with someone.
Look, I think it's a really good point. I know certainly for me, I took too long as well. It's probably about 5 years where I did have coaches and mentors, but I don't think I had like-minded people. And that's really the whole premise behind Build, Live, Give, is to actually have like-minded people so you can expedite that growth and be more accountable and more visible. So I hear your pain, and certainly if you're listening to this podcast, you're in a similar situation, reach out and get some help sooner, because it's not a job. We're not built for self-assessment. We're not built for helping ourselves. You do need someone else. It's no different to an athlete or any other endeavor. It's a really difficult job. Like Jon, you know how hard this gig is. Yeah. And you do need help. So, and as far as, getting help now, and, who do you sort of rely on now?
Well, interestingly enough, for the last 6 or 7 years, I've had a mentor and coach every single Monday. So I've been relentless on that, because he challenges my values, he challenges my perspective, he challenges my assumptions. But he was also amazing at supporting the ideas and the ideals that I hold. So that has been one thing that's been sort of continuous in more recent times. And I wouldn't go a Monday without that, unless I'm literally not physically in the country. I'll always commit to that. And I think it's commitment to a single end or a single cause that, even if you're making small progress, that really gets you there in the end.
Great. And a lot of people struggle with, well, how do I pick a right coach or mentor? How do I know that someone's right for me? How did you go through that journey yourself?
Pick one, make a mistake, move on.
Good advice.
It's going to happen.
Great advice. All right. Well, the next section is the build section. So when someone walks up to you and says, "Hey, Jon, what do you do?" How do you answer that?
The easiest way I describe it is I help people to describe it this way, which is help people articulate complex messages in short periods of time to busy and distracted people, and make sure that it's done with empathy and engagement.
Brilliant. And what are some examples of that?
So one of my favorites was a guy who is a well-known franchise owner, brands you would see in every single shopping mall. The most wonderful guy, just paranoid about public speaking. Used to get sweats, used to shake, literally would implode on stage and walk off and not finish his talk. That's how much it impacted him. And I was lucky enough to be able to meet the guy and work with him very closely. And we managed to get him a gig on the same stage as Tony Robbins. And I'm proud to say that after that 3 months, he did 2 consecutive shows with Tony, got 2 standing ovations, and then texted me going, "Oh my goodness, I reckon I could do this as a living. This is so addictive." And I'm super proud of him. And I believe that anyone can make that happen if they have that focus and that commitment.
Yeah, that's a brilliant example. And, for myself and all listeners, how did he get to share a stage with Tony Robbins? Quickly tell us about that story.
Yeah, it was a combination of, you know how you get those perfect moments of right timing, right question, right idea? He had been very, very successful with his franchise and managed to really identify with a market that was really interested in positive psychology, positive outcomes, changing the world in a positive way. And he had a combination of an amazing background and Tony Robbins coming up and wanting to find remarkable people doing remarkable business things for his business program. And it was a combination of just the right person at the right time.
And your view on, I know with podcasting in particular now, to get on a lot of the big podcasts around the world, you need to go through a podcast valet. There's someone that's sort of a chaperone, I suppose, in getting you on the right podcast. Is that a similar thing with speaking and speaking to stage?
Look, I would say almost certainly. Like any game where you need to be distinctive and stand out, the people you surround yourself with, how they support you both operationally and personally, really define. It's a team effort. Speaking is a team game, and while there might be one speaker, the reality is a whole host of people that contribute to that underneath that. And I don't think it's any different from any other successful endeavor.
Yeah, and I think I think that's becoming more realistic. But I know a lot of people, just think they can go to A to Z automatically, and I think getting people like yourself to help them through that journey is really powerful. Like the great work you did with that franchise guy. And as far as your ideal client, obviously you just mentioned the franchise person, but who else do you see as your ideal client?
I love working with people who are passionate about what they do, aggressive learners about themselves and want to innovate, in their own way, want to change the world, and 100% believe in what they do. And if you work with that type of person, you can create extraordinary things.
Great. And how did you sort of get to that? What was sort of your journey in deciding that is, or was it always that way?
You know what? It kind of always was. It's part of the reason why I'm involved with TED as well. They're optimistic. They believe in the future. They're positive on the whole. And they believe that there's a possibility that we can make a small change that could dramatically impact the world at a larger scale. And I don't think and that's one of the reasons why I think I had to become my own operator, because I didn't feel that in the corporate world there was enough of that.
Yeah, and you must see, with your great work with TedX, you must see so many people pitch ideas to you, whether it's through somebody else or direct to you, as we spoke about before. But what's some of the key ingredients to success for getting people on stage versus not? With all your experience,
Sure.
just shine some light on that.
Yeah. Look, I think an unrelenting belief in self, a clarity beyond compare that extends beyond your quote unquote next step. I'm a very fond of a John DeMartini quote who said that, if you want to change your city, you've got to have a plan for your state. If you want to change your state, you've got to have a plan for your nation. If you've got a plan for your nation, you've got to have a plan for your planet. And I really believe that you've got to take it to the next level in your thinking in order to achieve the level that you're at. And I think that type of clarity really makes a big difference when you're communicating on stage, because if it's not clear in your head, it's very difficult to be clear in their head what you're saying.
Great. And as far as your business model, how does your business model work? How do you help people?
Yeah, most of my work is individual, because a lot of the CEOs I work with don't like to share that they're getting communication training, which is a double-edged sword.
And understandable.
Obviously, they don't like to share that. But one of the things that does allow me to do is allows me to work with their direct reports, and we create a lot of team conversation around how we engage with our brand and our vision and our mission, how we engage with each other, how we communicate our message, not only within our community, but externally, and how do we do it in a way that really reflects what we believe and what we stand for. When you have a synergy of all those things, extraordinary amounts of things can happen in very short periods of time, and they're the types of organizations I love to work with.
Great. And when there's lots of people like you, Jon, out there, why would a CEO and their team pick you versus working with some other people in this space?
I think there's two things. The first one is that I'm very precise about the impact people have on stage. So I actually can quantify, based on the script or what they say, whether an audience is going to respond or not. And I don't think anyone that I'm aware of is able to quantify it to that degree. I would even go so far, if you know your audience really well, that I can get deep engagement, because one of the things that people don't understand is their audience. The second part is really around how do you then tie that to specific business outcomes, whether it's a branding outcome, a marketing outcome, or sales outcome. We tie that specifically to quantifiable and measurable outcomes, because otherwise you're just speaking for speaking's sake. And while that can be important to drive precise value, is really the purpose of speaking and communicating well, whether it's an individual or a brand.
Great. And I know we spoke before about the lows of pennies for fuel, but what are some of the things that you've done to improve the profitability of your business?
Wow. That's an iterative process rather than a thing. One of the things that has made the biggest difference is getting absolute clarity about who you are and the value you create, and then being able to demonstrate and quantify that with clients. Once that happens, it becomes its own exponential mechanism. I don't have a website. I'm not proud of it. I don't think that's a great idea. But I've been able to operate for the last 4 years without one, because the word of mouth continually builds the new business. And without a doubt, if you focus on creating extraordinary value, people talk about it. And if people talk about it, you're creating value. If you're creating value, that's where prosperity lives. And you can have a great website. That will definitely add to that. But I don't think that having a great website and not creating value is the way to go about business.
And you talk about word of mouth, and I know that it's tricky for you because not everyone will publicly mention that you've worked with them, but obviously behind the scenes they do. But what's sort of your number one source of leads? Or I'm assuming it's word of mouth, but it's
all word of mouth. My entire business is built on word of mouth. So the experience people have, the engagement they create, the quantified or the precision by which we create outcomes, all needs to be articulated and clear in order to generate that. And so I think it's that precision that people can rely on, that people feel they're getting quote unquote value.
Yeah. And when do you and how do you ask for referrals?
I've never asked for them.
Okay.
They
And
just come. Do you know what? I do have a good book called The Referral Engine, which I really, really want to read, but I haven't had time to read it. I'm sure there's a way to do that well.
yeah, and look, I think I haven't read that book, but I've heard of it, and I'll certainly put the link in the show notes. But I think one of the key things is just a matter of when. So I think most people wait too long. They wait to the end of the engagement
Yeah.
rather than, if you can ask for this at the start of the engagement. Twofold. One, that's often a great time because if someone's going to tell someone else about the service they've just purchased, they've got to actually rationalize whether it's the right thing for themselves.
Yeah.
So it makes sure that that they are making the right decision, and then they'll refer it. And then also, obviously, the compound of time. If you're working with someone over 3 months, it's much better to start with someone new
Yeah.
now rather than 3 months. If you're making such a positive impact on their life, like you did with that franchise guy.
Mm-hmm.
And
I guess I do that in my own way. I'm very, very mindful about people leaving with a sense of amazement or deep satisfaction. I think the moment you start helping people feel at ease, feel confident, have a great certainty, I think that speaks a lot to the value you create. And I think without sort of directly asking for the referral, when people leave, I often get, oh my God, I'm going to just tell everyone about you. It's not, it sounds arrogant. I don't mean to sound arrogant, but people often say that. And I think it's because I'm mindful about how I make people feel. And I think that's a big difference on top of the intellectual stuff that differentiates. And that in itself becomes its own referral momentum.
yeah, and what are some of the biggest challenges that you face in your business at the moment?
So in my world, I think everyone has a combination of admin and then delivery challenge and getting that ratio right. So I am always working on systematizing and creating processes. I'm a big one for creating processes. I don't always follow them, but I at least know under pressure what the next step is, and I can quote unquote follow that blindly and know that it's going to get an outcome. So I think that's probably one of my biggest challenges. The second one is really around, and I think this again for any early business, you might generate a lot of business, but if the cash flow doesn't come, that's really difficult, especially when you're working with larger organizations where they have 60 and 90-day pay cycle. That's always going to be a challenge. And I think the other one's my own limitation. I'm always wanting to do more than I probably am technically capable of delivering from a time point of view. I think being realistic about what you can achieve and not over promising is one of the other things that stops you creating a rod for your back.
Yeah, and you sort of talked about that before and how you prioritize and stay focused. Just take us through how you do that.
So every week I pretty much focus on 3 major outcomes, and that might be a piece of a bigger project or it might be a project in and of itself. And then I explicitly plan out steps around what they need to be, and I allocate time around that because I find that it's really easy to get distracted by email or requests or friendly conversations and catch-ups, especially in the early days, because you quote unquote felt like you had a lot of time. You often accepted those meeting requests. And I guess you needed to be more precise about how you apply your time. I get probably 30 to 40 LinkedIn requests with no message. And I used to accept them all and then realized that I didn't want a big network. I wanted a great network. I wanted to have relationships. I wanted to engage with people. So I stopped doing that. And for all those people that don't put a note, I ask, what is the purpose, in a nice way, get clarification about why they want to engage and how we can create value on LinkedIn. If they don't respond, I don't accept. And the reason for that is I want to have engaged people connecting in meaningful ways. And if I can create mechanisms that allow that to happen or build that, then I feel that I can create more value from that relationship, both directions. And so setting processes like that up allowed me to define who I would connect with and who I didn't. And that saved me, I reckon, at least 95% of my quote unquote wasted time.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's so powerful, and the ability to say no. But I can hear with you, you do it in a very authentic way, which
Yeah.
is fantastic. So before we go into the next section, I'd just like to mention our community, which helps corporate escapees like Jon and myself. I know Jon, you're a little bit was a little bit long ago, but
Yeah.
I know for a lot of our community, it's people that are leaving now.
Yeah.
And really what we're trying to do is help people build, live, and give. So you get direct coaching by myself and also access to hundreds of vetted suppliers. So all you need to do is go to blgboost.com and you can find out more. So the next section, Jon, is the live section. So what are some of the additional daily habits that I know you've already mentioned a few, but what are some of the other things that you do to help you be successful?
Um, I I I think I have a little bit of an addictive personality, so I can get sucked into one thing and really get pulled sideways quite dramatically. So I'm a big believer in quantifying how I allocate my time and the outcomes that that creates. So I basically set up myself some little tools that make sure that I'm on check. So for those people who are familiar with the Pomodoro method, you get any of one of those apps from the App Store, and that's really, really good at staying focused. I have another one called Rescue Time that quantifies how much time I spend on my computer and what it's allocated to. So it might be, I don't know, a PowerPoint presentation, or how much time I spend on a website and how long and which website, or how long I spend in email. And that allows me to quantify what time I'm spending, what value I'm creating, and optimize for the most efficient ratio. So being really clear about how you use your time is one thing, and then being more precise about where you allocate your quote unquote time. So, CRMs, tracking conversations, building relationships. I'm always mapping and monitoring that, because I'm not very good at keeping things in my head, or maybe I have too many things going on in my head. And if I don't rely on these external tools to support me, then I lose control very quickly. So I think that's probably the single best piece of advice I can kind of give people is know who you are, know what you're doing, but also knowing what you're creating and continuing to do that and amplify that with tools. And
Yeah, and do you share that with anyone, Jon? Because I myself also track my time, but I find
yeah,
that it's quite consistent in my behaviours. So I
yeah,
see it, but I don't actually change the behaviour as much as I'd like.
yeah,
How do you go about making sure that you don't fall into that trap?
yeah. So the conversion from what you should do to a habit or a ritual is something that takes a little bit of focus and work. Charles Duhigg has a great book on that, about how you create triggers and how you identify when you're getting, psychologically getting pulled or distracted. Highly recommend you get into that book and understand the psychology of yourself and how you operate, and therefore how do you build ritual that enables you to move forward. One of the ways is to externalize it. Have an accountability partner, have a coach, have a mentor who you are committed to every week to interacting with, and saying what you achieved or didn't achieve, or maybe being a sounding board, because that's when reality really kicks in. It's really, really easy as a solo operator to disappear into your own world and think you're being productive, not be accountable, not get out some outcome on the other side, and then wonder why you didn't get there. And so I'm a big believer in making sure that you're very clear about the value you create for others, but also the value you create for yourself.
And what's something you'll achieve this year, 2018, that you know you probably wouldn't achieve if you're still working in corporate?
I'd almost summarize that as everything. I have a life that I have complete control over. I have a revenue stream that I like to think is relatively predictable. I get to work with some of the smartest and most intelligent people in the world. Through TEDx Melbourne, I also get to meet some of the smartest and wisest people in the world, and I get an opportunity to learn and grow with them. that learning and growing cycle is, I think, one of the reasons why I've been able to achieve what I achieved. And why wouldn't you? why wouldn't that be a good outcome over the 9-to-5 drudgery that I used to have?
And Leanne, I know who's your partner. If she was listening to this, what would you like to say to her about the support she's given you through this journey?
I couldn't have done it without her. Just as simple as that. She's amazingly patient, amazingly supportive, amazingly realistic, and has really been the backbone, I think, and the consistent support that if I didn't have her, I don't know where I'd be. She's been amazing.
Well, the next section's the give section. And what's a cause or a community you're passionate about and why?
Yeah, I love the DOXA organization, DOXA. They are really into helping youth engagement and youth at risk. And I'm a big believer that the youth of our future are our future. And if we don't shape them, that we've got no one else but ourselves to blame about the world that we live in.
Yeah, so I Whiteline, I don't know if you've heard of Whiteline.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I did some work when I was at corporate with Whiteline, and that was a very fulfilling period of my life where helping people, and you just forget how lucky you've got it. And certainly for my children, I now and again remind them just they live in the Bayside bubble in Melbourne, and just how fortunate they are. But it's I think that's great. I'll put the links to Doxa in the show notes so people can find out more about that. And the last section is the action section. So it's just some rapid responses from you on these questions to really add value to our community. So the first one is, what are your top 3 personal productivity tips?
Understand how you create habits, understand how you spend your time, and get 100% crystal clear about what you're doing, because then you'll be really clear about what you're not doing.
Excellent. You've mentioned some great apps already, but what are some other apps or software that you use to help you be successful?
Yeah, I'm always learning and growing, so I have a big list of podcasts that I love. Accidental Creative, Reid Hoffman's Masters of Scale, and also are probably great tools to kind of keep you not only current, but sort of in the know of what's coming down the pike in terms of freshness of and currency of what's happening in the market. I really believe that if knowing your audience is a really important part of understanding and relating to them. Other tools I use are, your basic ones. My phone, I couldn't live without. I'm really focused on how I apply myself, and so any tool that can help you to do that around productivity, around awareness, around personal mastery, become really, really important. And as you've already mentioned, they're not really a tool, but mentors are the differentiator.
Great. And just on your phone, John, what are some specific examples? Just go to your home screen if you've got it. And
so on my home screen at the moment, I have Slack, which is my team communication tool. It's literally eliminated email for my team.
Yes.
My podcast app I just mentioned. I've just got into audiobooks again. I go through cycles. So any state or any library will have audiobooks. Great place to start. Pocket is probably one of the, and Palabra are some of the others. So Palabra is what's called an RSS feed. And to simplify, that's basically it gathers news stories and just gives you the headline. And then from there, I can work out which headline I'm going to read. From there, if I think I want to read the whole article, I push it to an app called Pocket, and Pocket strips out all the advertising and just leaves you with the text. And then I can use that to scan documents really quickly. It will read it to you, but it's a bit robotic. But it allows me to really focus on just the text. And then from there, I can then learn and grow and evolve as an individual. And occasionally I use that tool to push out to my social media if I feel it's worth sharing.
Brilliant. Great. And some parting advice. What's some parting advice, John, you'd love to leave the BLG audience?
Wow. Think and Grow Rich always talks about a concept called the burning desire. If you don't have something that lights you up every single day of the week, then you're going to struggle to do that over the long term. Find out what lights you up and just continue on it. And realize that what lights you up today might not be what lights you up tomorrow. And you need the courage to shift and change and evolve as necessary in order to achieve that bigger outcome.
Excellent. And we'll have all the links in the show notes to the resources Jon's mentioned. And also you can find out more about Jon at his LinkedIn profile. Like he said, he's about to launch his new website, but if this goes live and it's not ready, just go to his LinkedIn profile, which is Jon, Jon, and then Yeo. And also, as he said, just put in there that you've heard him on this podcast. That'd be fantastic. And just a reason why you want to connect. I think that's so powerful that you do. LinkedIn's a brilliant platform, but I think it's really powerful to take Jon's advice and just say why you want to connect with somebody. Because I know we've all been at the receiving end of getting requests that have, obvious, just trying to push or peddle a product. And, none of us like that. So certainly takes Jon's advice on that. But Jon, it was brilliant having you on the podcast. I know Bright Star Consulting, you do a lot of brilliant work behind the scenes that is not always recognized on stage, or people don't know that it's you, but I know you do some brilliant work, and we love having you in the broader community of BLG, and thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the Corporate Escapees podcast, brought to you by the team at Build, Live, Give. If you found this podcast helpful, please share it with other corporate escapees. If you would like to join a community of like-minded peers, please visit www.buildlivegive.com. Until next time, thanks for listening and be brave.